Hello, I'm Jay Shadler. Our first report from 1999 introduces us to Lisa Michelle Lambert. She was one of the youngest women ever to be sentenced to life in prison in her state. The crime, murder of another teenage girl.
Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, a place where religion is rooted deep in the soil. A place that believes in justice. But for nearly a decade, this quiet community has been ripped apart by the impact of one of the most brutal murders they have ever seen.
You can't imagine there's that much blood in a person's body. You can't.
It was on December 20th, 1991, before dawn, that three teenagers left their homes. In their car, a butcher knife and a long rope. Within an hour, a 16-year-old girl was dead, her head and body cut 33 times, her throat slashed.
County 48-6 arriving.
Police and prosecutors say they had overwhelming evidence against the girl's killer, who they say was a jealous rival and a vicious sociopath.
I believe that the Lancaster County justice system is so corrupt that nobody has any idea exactly how deep it lies.
The battle for the truth has pitted the state and federal courts against each other and left lives and careers in ruins. And it all began so simply in the summer of 1989, when a boy and a girl fell in love. 18-year-old Lawrence Yunkin and 16-year-old Lisa Michelle Lambert, the athlete and the beauty and instant attraction. Lisa Michelle.
He had long blonde hair and all that stuff, you know, that teenage girls like.
The first time I took her out, that night before I left, I ran back to the house. I said, "Oh yeah, I love you."
He worshipped her. She had to have him.
17-year-old Tabitha Buck hung out with Lawrence and Lisa Michelle, cruising Lancaster at night.
Were they in love with each other? I don't know. Probably more so obsessed with each other.
Soon, their fixation with each other started to spin out of control. Lisa Michelle and Lawrence had violent arguments and used other people to make each other jealous. In the summer of 1991, Lawrence sought out 10th grader Laurie Sho. Did you like her as much as you liked Lisa Michelle?
I don't think so. Not as much.
Lawrence and Laurie only dated for a little over a week, just long enough to make Lisa Michelle bitterly jealous. Feelings that grew stronger when she discovered she was pregnant. Laurie said Lisa Michelle began stalking her, repeatedly calling her home and picking fights. Laurie's mother, Hazel Sho.
Michelle confronted Laurie in the hallway at the mall and pushed Laurie into the wall, hit her head.
She was scared to death. I mean, Laurie was afraid to go anywhere because Michelle was going to show up.
Laurie's father, John Sho, was worried about his daughter, especially when Laurie told him a secret that Lawrence had attacked her on one of their dates. Lawrence denies raping Laurie, but Hazel Sho used the date rape as a threat. She told Lawrence and Lisa Michelle that if they didn't stop harassing her daughter, she would press charges against Lawrence.
He heard that she was pressing charges for the rape against him, and he was scared.
Hazel says the threats did not stop Lisa Michelle, and she finally persuaded her daughter to press assault charges against her. A week before Christmas, Hazel got a strange phone call at the hospital where she worked. A woman said she was Laurie's guidance counselor. Laurie had a problem, and the counselor urgently needed to see Hazel at the school early the next morning. In the cold, pre-dawn hours of December 20th, Lawrence Yunkin, Lisa Michelle Lambert, and Tabitha Buck began driving to Laurie's apartment. At 6:45, as Laurie got ready for school, Hazel left for her meeting. But when she got there, the guidance counselor was nowhere to be found. Hazel headed home, hoping she could catch Laurie before she left for school.
I came in the house and the lights were on, and I called to Laurie and there was no answer. And I saw spots on the floor. And then I looked to my right and Laurie was lying on the floor, gasping. Then I saw that her throat was slit. So I picked her up as best I could and cradled her in my arms and tried to keep the wound together and told her I was so sorry that it was set up and who did it. And she whispered, Michelle did it.
That evening, the police arrested Lisa Michelle and Lawrence and Tabitha at the local bowling alley. Under interrogation, Lisa Michelle said what was supposed to be a kid's prank to scare Laurie, to tie her up and cut her hair, had gone horribly wrong when Tabitha suddenly went crazy. Lisa Michelle tried to stop her but failed and fled the apartment in terror before Laurie's throat was slashed. Lisa Michelle signed this statement accusing Tabitha. As for Lawrence Yunkin, Lisa Michelle insisted he was not involved in the killing. He had only dropped the two girls off near Laurie Show's apartment complex and picked them up afterwards.
There's some type of a serrated edge.
At a nearby river, police videotaped the discovery of the murder weapon. In a dumpster, they found the bloody clothes worn by the killers.
You know what you done, young lady?
The evidence against Lisa Michelle seemed overwhelming. But at the trial, she had startling new testimony. She said she had omitted a key fact from her statement to the police. Lawrence was involved in the murder.
I thought that I was going to cover up for him and that I was going to get out. And I thought that he would change.
The truth was, Lisa Michelle said, Lawrence and Tabitha had together killed Laurie Show, and she had evidence to back it up. While awaiting trial in jail, Lisa Michelle had written Lawrence a series of 29 questions, saying she needed to know more if she was to keep protecting him. His answers appeared to be a confession. Lisa Michelle, should I still cover up that you helped Tabby kill Laurie? Lawrence's answer, yes, I'm positive.
I thought that when my lawyer presented that was going to clear the whole thing up and that the judge was going to be like, wow, this guy's a liar, and just dismiss his whole testimony, and that's not what happened.
Instead, the judge found the 29 questions suspect. And with so much other evidence against her, a verdict was reached over the weekend. Lisa Michelle Lambert, guilty of first-degree murder.
I'm happy for the death penalty.
But instead of death, she was given life in prison without parole. Tabitha Buck was convicted of second-degree murder and given the same sentence. Lawrence Yunkin took a plea bargain for third-degree homicide. For the people of Lancaster County, justice had been served. The healing could begin. Or could it? Lisa Michelle Lambert would get another hearing, and this time the local police and prosecutor would find themselves accused of terrible crimes. And peaceful, religious Lancaster County would be accused of selling its soul to frame an innocent girl.
The state of Pennsylvania sent teenager Lisa Michelle Lambert to prison for murder. But Lambert began to level charges of her own, and she blasted an open and shut case wide open.
In the summer of 1996, 4 years after she was convicted, the case against Lisa Michelle Lambert began to unravel. It all started with the document that came to be known as the 29 Questions. Questions Lisa Michelle wrote to Lawrence after the murder. Lawrence's answers appeared to be a confession that he and Tabitha were the real killers. Desperate and unable to afford an attorney, Lisa Michelle finally hand-wrote a plea to her last hope, the federal courts. And luck was with her. A judge not only agreed to hear her case, he even assigned an attorney from one of Philadelphia's biggest law firms, Tina Rainville.
She told me her story. I was convinced it was a lie. And I had 50 questions lined up in my head that were going to prove that she was lying. And I started down the list. About 15 minutes into the phone call, I realized something was wrong.
Lisa Michelle described an astonishing conspiracy to frame her, and Rainville says her own investigation uncovered corruption even deeper.
763.
The police, she says, concealed evidence or altered it to make Lisa Michelle appear guilty. They switched the clothes found in the dumpster to make them seem to be Lisa Michelle's. And when key evidence was found at the river, Rainville says the police video camera was shut off and the evidence simply disappeared.
I said to her, Basically, you're telling me that all these people in your trial lied. Why?
Lisa Michelle said that in 1991, she had been stalked by a police officer. She said she was able to keep him away from her until the night of June 17th, when he and two other officers suddenly burst into her home.
They raped me. They pushed me in the living room and raped me.
And who were the alleged rapists? Lisa Michelle identified the officer who secured the crime scene and the officer who'd investigated the assault charge against her. Rainville said the police could not come up with a single hard piece of physical evidence linking Lisa Michelle to the crime. No fingerprints, no DNA. In March 1997, Rainville took their arguments to Philadelphia's federal court. They presented testimony that police and the prosecutor altered almost every piece of evidence in the case to make Lisa Michelle appear guilty. At the hearing, one of the nation's best-known authorities on battered women presented this report for the defense. The expert said Lisa Michelle had been conditioned by constant beatings to do exactly as Lawrence said. When the attack on Laurie Show turned deadly, Lisa Michelle simply did as she was told and covered for Lawrence.
He was beating me, doing horrible things to me.
Well, on occasion, just a little argument, but, you know, they went into deeper than that sometimes.
They went maybe that deep?
Man.
She looks pretty roughed up. You did that?
Yeah.
But what about the most powerful evidence against her? Hazel Show's testimony that Laurie's last words were, "Michelle did it." Prominent defense experts convinced the judge that Laurie's throat wounds were so severe she could not possibly have spoken. And with that, the judge felt the case against Lisa Michelle simply collapsed. Convinced that Lisa Michelle was actually innocent, and equally convinced the police and prosecutor were guilty of conspiring against her, Judge Stuart Dalzell, on April 21st, 1997, issued an opinion unlike any in American legal history. He found 25 separate examples of misconduct and directed the U.S. attorney to investigate the prosecutor and 7 police officers. He declared Lisa Michelle to be the foremost victim in the case. And then he invoked his full power as a federal judge, barring the state from ever retrying her. But had justice really been done? Outraged police and prosecutors were vowing to fight back at any cost. The federal judge had gotten it all wrong, they said. Lisa Michelle Lambert was a vicious liar and a cold-blooded killer, and they wanted the world to hear their side of the story.
That's crap. Michelle Lambert is not the hero here.
The real injustice, police say, is the long string of lies told by Laurie Show's killer, Lisa Michelle Lambert. In fact, 7 different people say they heard Lisa Michelle threaten to kill Laurie. Many of them even witnessed Lisa Michelle physically attack her. Randy Rodriguez.
It was vicious, it was quick. She pulled her hair, she smacked her in the face, she punched her. And then Laurie would, you know, all the while she's saying, stop, you know, please stop.
And there is more. Lisa Michelle has changed her story at least 6 different times. But police say all of her accounts make her, at the very least, an accomplice to murder. Then there is that mysterious letter with the 29 questions that apparently prove Lisa Michelle's innocence. Police say, just look at it. All across the document, words are scratched out and new words written in. And what about Laurie Show's dying statement that Michelle did it? 4 other physicians, including the doctors who performed the actual autopsy, have stated Laurie could have said those words.
She's my daughter, and I knew she was dying. And I'm going to pay attention to everything that she had to say.
Just laid in the room.
Finally, there's that troubling question of why the massive conspiracy against Lisa Michelle might exist in the first place. You say it's a conspiracy. What's it about?
It's about the rape.
The officers Lisa Michelle accuses say that is the most vicious lie of all. So if, as the police claim, Lisa Michelle is lying about the murder, what really happened? Lisa Michelle refuses to talk about what occurred that morning. But the woman who was with her, Tabitha Buck, has a lot to say.
Michelle had cut her throat. And she didn't just cut it so that there was blood. She cut it open. She held her head back. She cut her throat. She just kept cutting.
I'm very sorry about what happened, but I wasn't the cause of it. And I don't know what else to say.
She has to live with herself. She has to look at herself every morning. If she has any conscience at all, it will haunt her till she dies.
As of 2000, Tabitha Buck continued to serve out a life sentence with no possibility of parole. And Lawrence Youngkin was serving the term of his plea bargain, 10 to 20 years at Dallas State Correctional Facility. In 1997, Lisa Michelle Lambert was getting on with her life. And then another shocking turn of events. After 10 months of freedom, Lisa Michelle Lambert went back to prison. It was a drive Lisa Michelle Lambert's attorneys never expected to take.
I'm feeling devastated, very upset.
In 1997, an appeals court ruled that the federal court had taken Lambert's case out of turn and that the state should have been allowed to review the case further. That meant the federal decision was voided, and the case of Pennsylvania versus Lisa Michelle Lambert would head back to Lancaster County, to the same judge and the same court where Lambert had first been convicted.
I know that I'm innocent. I know that this is part of a conspiracy. I know the conspiracy is far larger and far more reaching than people even think it is.
In this courtroom, Lancaster's Judge Lawrence Stengel conducted a 7-week hearing looking into all of Lisa Michelle's allegations. In the end, with a 326-page opinion, he agreed with Pennsylvania's Attorney General. No official misconduct had been proven, and the real killer was Lisa Michelle Lambert. Judge Stengel let stand her sentence to life in prison. Then another setback for Lisa Michelle. After an exhaustive 14-month investigation, the FBI found no criminal misconduct by the police or the prosecutor. By 2000, Lisa Michelle Lambert was in prison in New Jersey, but is not giving up and will continue to appeal. If she loses in the state courts, she hopes to have her case heard once again by Judge Stuart Dalzell, the man who originally released her from prison. For Hazel Show, that means continuing a legal battle that has already lasted over 8 years. The continuing nightmare of reliving how her 16-year-old daughter died.
I'll do whatever it takes. And in her memory, I can go on to fight whatever's necessary in her name.
When Saul Scheinbein learned that his son was suspected of murder, he had a choice. As our next report from 1999 explores, Scheinbein could insist his son turn himself in, or he could help him flee.
It was a crisp autumn morning in the quiet upscale suburb of Silver Spring, Maryland. Murder didn't normally happen here. That was something residents read about in nearby Washington, D.C. But on this morning, that was about to change. A realtor preparing to show an empty house to a customer stumbled on something horrible.
When he opened up the garage door to go in, he immediately knew from the smell that this was a human body.
A decomposing body that had been dismembered. Prosecutor Jim Trusty was among the first to arrive on the scene.
It's going to probably always stand out as the most gruesome crime scene and gruesome evidence that I will ever run across.
Surprisingly, this grisly crime scene in a sleepy Maryland suburb would not only lead police and prosecutors on a trail that stretched from their neighborhood to New York City to across the Atlantic, it would eventually involve world leaders and threaten this country's international diplomacy. But at first, police were concerned with problems closer to home. It would take investigators days to figure out who the victim was inside that garage, but within hours, detectives felt they knew who may have killed him. They followed a trail of blood drops from the empty house down the street to the home of attorney Saul Scheinbein.
When was the first time you realized that a terrible crime had been committed?
When the police knocked on our door.
And what did they say?
They said they wanted to check our garage, and they wanted to check my son's room upstairs.
At that point, what was your reaction?
Disbelief.
You thought, you've got the wrong kid.
That's correct.
But it increasingly looked like they had the right kid. Inside the Scheinbein's garage, infrared photography showed a large blood stain on the newly scrubbed floor. And next to the mutilated body in that vacant house was a circular saw that records show Sam Scheinbein had just purchased. Police believe Sam Scheinbein and his friend Aaron Needle killed a man, brought the body back to his family's garage, and spent the next 3 days trying to destroy it.
And the family was unaware of this activity?
Well, that's another one of the great open questions. Saul Scheinbein came home to find a stand-up fan in his kitchen and a horrible smell permeating the lower floor. He confronted Sam on this, and Sam told him that a battery for a jet ski had blown that he had been working on, and that was the sulfuric smell that would have ensued from that battery blowing open.
If Saul Scheinbein had no idea of the horror unfolding in his own garage, he knew now that his son could be in serious trouble. But Sam Scheinbein and Aaron Needle were nowhere to be found. The two teens had fled to New York City. Just down the road in the town of Rockville, another family was also waiting. Eliette Ramos and her fiancé Eric Dawes were awaiting word on Eliette's 19-year-old son, Freddie Teo.
We were inseparable ever since he was little. He was everything to me, and I was everything to him.
When he didn't come home at a certain time, she was worried. And I guess within her, she knew something was wrong.
Then Eric Dawes heard on the radio that a body had been found, and the rough description sounded like Freddie Teo.
The police told me, "I'm sorry that it's your son."
Freddie Teo's corpse was so mutilated, police would not allow his mother to identify the body.
They had cut his arms and legs, and he's brutally burned.
With the victim identified, police quickly gathered more evidence implicating Sam Scheinbein and Aaron Needle. Both young men had been in trouble with the law before. Scheinbein for theft, Needle for drugs. The two had both spent time in a juvenile boot camp like this one, but neither was thought to be violent. Then witnesses described a recent fight between Freddie Teo and Aaron Needle. The two had argued over a girl, and Aaron Needle seemed humiliated and vengeful afterward. As for Scheinbein, prosecutors believed he wanted to kill simply for the thrill of it.
Sam Scheinbein was more looking for the proper victim than needing a particular beef with Freddie Teo. He was just almost in a thrill-kill mode.
The Scheinbeins say they were stunned that their son might be involved in such a heinous crime.
Do you doubt that your son was responsible for this murder?
No, I can't say that I doubt it, no.
Sam Scheinbein and Aaron Needle both called their parents from New York, aware that police were searching for them. The two teens threatened to commit suicide rather than return to Maryland and face murder charges. The Needles insisted Aaron return home. 17-year-old Aaron Needle was under arrest and charged with first-degree murder within hours of his return to Maryland. But it is what the Scheinbeins did that ignited a storm of controversy and international debate. Sam Scheinbein was on board a jet, heading halfway around the world from New York City to relatives in Israel.
Saul Scheinbein says he sent his son to Israel to calm what he believed were suicidal tendencies. Saul Scheinbein swears he had no idea he had just sent his son to the one country that would declare him a citizen and refuse to extradite him.
That wasn't my plan, and in fact, I bought him a round-trip ticket. We did everything possible to ensure that Samuel come back here, to come back to the United States to face the charges.
Word spread on both sides of the world that this American teen wanted for murder at home was refusing to leave Tel Aviv.
Why do you think he went to Israel?
To run away from the justice and from the murder he committed.
I mean, we thought, well, this is outrageous. This will never stand.
What prosecutor Jim Trusty didn't know then was that Sam Scheinbein had the Israeli law on his side. Israeli citizens could not be forced to face prosecution in another country. Sam Scheinbein was arrested and jailed and would go on trial for murder, but in Israel, not in the country in which he was born, raised, and allegedly committed murder. With protesters outside the capital, American officials demanded the Israelis return Scheinbein.
We're doing our utmost to achieve that.
Despite strong American and Israeli sentiment to send Scheinbein home, the Israeli Supreme Court ruled the law allowed him to stay and face murder charges there.
Want to say something? You have any regrets?
He smirks in the cameras. It just isn't right. It just isn't justice.
He was facing life without parole if convicted of first-degree murder here. That would literally mean he could die in prison at a ripe old age.
In Israel?
In Israel, I think the best-case scenario by way of punishment is that he would serve about 20 years.
20 years?
That's correct.
Max?
He'll be 37 years old and able to walk out of a jail for the last time.
Maryland police have charged Saul Scheinbein with obstruction of justice for helping his son flee prosecution in the U.S. The father has yet to go on trial because he, too, now lives in Israel.
Samuel is not avoiding prosecution. Samuel is merely having the trial here and the sentence here. Samuel is going to stand up and face the music.
In Israel?
In Israel.
Are you innocent?
Samuel Scheinbein's case prompted the Israeli government to pass a law making it harder for non-resident citizens to fight extradition. But the law came too late to affect Samuel Scheinbein. He agreed to plead guilty to murder, but only in an Israeli court. In September of 1999, Israeli prosecutors reached a plea deal with Samuel Scheinbein, a sentence of 24 years with the possibility of parole in 16 years. The legal team in Israel did not consult with their Maryland counterparts before reaching the deal with Scheinbein. Montgomery County State's Attorney Doug Gansler said they should have. If consultation had taken place, he would have argued that the 24-year sentence was too light for a man who would have faced life without parole had he been tried and convicted in the U.S.
We had confessions from Mr. Scheinbein. We had fingerprint evidence. We have his handwriting, basically a recipe for murder, which he then carried out.
Gansler said that the victim's family shared his dissatisfaction with the plea bargain.
The Teo family feels that justice has not been achieved in this case, that Mr. Scheinbein and his family have continually been able to manipulate the judicial system.
Instead of this, an American maximum security prison with small cells and limited time outdoors, Scheinbein will serve his time in the Israeli prison system, where even violent offenders are free to roam the campus-like setting, sunbathe, and play sports.
It's a nice place. It's like we have everything here.
While Scheinbein is likely to be a free man when he's in his mid-30s, he will not be able to return to the U.S. without having to stand trial or set foot in a country willing to extradite him. Our next report from 1999 goes inside a home gripped by fear and violence. A home where two young brothers risked life in prison to protect their mother and sisters.
In the shadow of Arkansas's Ozark Mountains, not far from Jonesboro, where two boys stunned the nation when they gunned down their classmates, the community ponders another inconceivable act of violence. This story started and ended right here.
Are your sons murderers?
No, they're not.
Sonia, do you forgive your sons?
Yeah, I do. Because they did what they had to do to protect me and their sisters and themselves.
14-year-old Neil Eldridge and his 15-year-old brother Jesse say that in order to protect their family, they had to assassinate their father.
Jesse, were you afraid of your father?
Yes. He was a lot bigger than both of us, and he usually always carried a gun on him, and he was always threatening to kill us. He'd beat us with his fist all the time.
One time he came in, he didn't like the food my mom would cook for him.
So he took the plate and just threw it up on the ceiling and started beating me and Jesse.
And if it wasn't food, then it was the condition of their rooms or the way their hair was brushed or the clothes they wore.
Did your husband ever abuse you?
Yeah.
What did he do to you, Sonia?
He used to hit me and pull me by the hair and just throw stuff at me and break stuff and throwing people around and throwing the kids around and saying he hated us.
And then, Sonia Eldridge says, there was the emotional abuse. Rick Eldridge would constantly isolate the boys, sometimes pulling them out of school in favor of homeschooling. There were no books. Instead, he worked them hard, at times forcing them to haul large rocks back and forth for no reason. Richard Gellis of the University of Pennsylvania is one of the country's leading experts on family violence. He has no official involvement in the Eldridge case, but at our request read transcripts and watched taped interviews of the family.
Neil, when he was little, he was about 2 years old, and he was trying to put his clothes on, and his dad he wouldn't let me help him. He just pushed me away.
Your child was frustrated. He was trying to get his clothes on. He couldn't do it. A mother's instinct is to help. The father shoves her out of the way. She can't help. And she realizes, I'll never be able to help. I'll never be able to get between him and my kids and protect them.
Another measure of Rick Eldridge's extreme cruelty, Gellis says, was how he treated family animals.
He would kill family pets. He would just shoot them right in front of them while they were crying and screaming for him not to kill them.
What would it be like for a child to watch his father kill the family pet?
It would be like watching yourself get killed. And to watch your father deliberately kill the family pet is like a warning sign. You better not do this, because if I can kill this helpless creature, imagine what I can do to you.
Was there anyone who knew what was going on inside the Eldridge home? Friends and relatives knew, but Sonia says they were afraid of her husband. And the boys' school knew. In court, a school nurse testified she found, quote, some big, wide blue marks down Jesse's leg, consistent with a belt. A guidance counselor said that she, quote, absolutely suspected child abuse. And the former principal said, quote, everybody knew these kids were being abused. On several occasions, the school notified state authorities.
Our caseworkers responded in the time prescribed by law. They did a correct assessment of what was going on in the home, and it was handled correctly.
Joe Quinn is a spokesman for the Arkansas Department of Human Services. He says the details of the Eldridge file are confidential, but maintains his agency responded properly. Jesse says he called the agency and pleaded for help 6 or 7 times.
Were repeated calls made by the family?
We can't document them.
You have no records that they called constantly?
We had contact with the family. We have records of that, but we do not have records that they called us on a regular basis.
The one time the agency visited the home, Rick Eldridge wasn't there. Sonia says she told the young caseworker, out of fear for their lives, that everything was all right. On January 24th, 1998, Neil and Jesse say they had no one to call and only one option left.
He come into my room and he just started jerking my dresser drawers out and throwing them at me and throwing clothes everywhere, and he flipped my bed over, and then he jumped on me and started beating me with his fist and held me down because I was screaming. He started suffocating me with his hand.
Then Rick Eldridge stormed into Neil's room.
He come in there and threw my head up against the wall and started punching me with his fist. I just couldn't take it anymore. I didn't want to go on living like that.
It just got to be enough?
Right.
Describe at what moment killing your father actually became a possibility.
After you get beat every day your whole life, and your sisters get beat, and they're scared for their lives, scared to death, you finally get up the courage to do it.
Armed with their own .22 caliber rifles, the boys set the ambush. Jesse positioned himself around the back of the house. Neil up on the roof of the shed. They waited, in 20-degree weather for an hour and a half. Rick Eldridge drove up in his truck at about 5:30 p.m. He got out. Jesse fired first.
I shot once and turned around and started shaking and gagging. I was just trembling with fear.
Then Neil fired.
I raised up and shot 4 times. Jumped off the back of the barn and ran back in the woods.
With 3 bullets lodged in his body, the boy's father made it as far as the porch and fell. It was little Rachel who found him still breathing, but by the time an ambulance had come, Rick Eldridge was dead. There are no more beatings in this home, but the Eldridges are still afraid. The charge? First-degree murder.
Neil, if you could sit right now in front of a jury and tell them anything, what would you say to them?
I tell them, please don't send us to jail because we had to do it. He was going to kill us.
Tell him I was sorry for what I'd done, but I can't change it. And then if I wouldn't have done it, we'd all be dead right now.
The Arkansas Court of Appeals ruled that the Eldridge brothers would be tried as adults. And in April of 2000, Jesse and Neil Eldridge pleaded guilty to manslaughter. They each received a sentence of 6 years. The first violence a child encounters is often in the form of bullying. In 1999, the state of Georgia enacted a law specifically to address this type of cruelty. Bullying is a problem that affects at least 20% of our nation's school children, making many of them dread going to school.
Felt like running, but I couldn't move. They wouldn't leave me alone.
In 1999, the Georgia state government introduced anti-bullying legislation in response to tragic events that took place in previous months. In the town of Woodruff, Georgia, 13-year-old Josh Beluardo got off his school bus where Jonathan Miller had been bullying and harassing him. 15-year-old Jonathan Miller suddenly punched Josh in the back and then kicked him when he fell. 2 days later, Josh died from his injuries. Jonathan Miller was sentenced to life in prison in May of 1999. In the same Georgia town 4 years earlier, another bullying incident had a deadly consequence.
The same set of circumstances have occurred again.
15-year-old Brian Head had also been tortured by bullies.
They would just tease him about his weight. They'd put like signs on his back that said just stupid stuff.
Like, shut up, fat boy, and all this stuff.
Brian suffered not just occasional teasing, but incessant cruelty.
From the classroom, out into the hallway, in his ear, at his back, to the next class, all throughout the day.
Brian took his father's revolver to school and in front of his teacher and 10th grade class put the gun to his head. He shouted, "I can't take it anymore," and killed himself. In November of 1999, the Georgia anti-bullying law was enacted, allowing schools to suspend students for bullying and, after a third incident, send them for alternative schooling. When the subject is young killers, one simple question is usually asked: why? In 1999, one search for answers led to violent video games and their role in making violent kids. Video game makers call them first-person shooter games. You see just what a shooter sees. One of the fastest-growing kinds of games, they have been enormously profitable. Partly responsible, said one group of lawyers, for parents for the death of 3 girls in the Paducah, Kentucky school shooting. A boy who'd never handled a gun hit 8 scrambling, terrified kids in just 8 quick shots. The parents charged video games taught him how.
A technique that's totally counterintuitive, and that is to point the gun, pull the trigger, instantly move to the next target, pull the trigger again, whereas the natural thing to do is to empty your gun into a target until that target falls.
These lawyers argue these games also get kids used to killing, twisting the natural purpose of play. Some scientists say they even change how the brain grows.
Play is the basis of a lot of the skill learning that goes on in development.
laying down networks that govern everything from physical skill to social behavior. New synapses, new connections between nerve cells form.
Brain growth altered by interactive games. The issue, of course, is whether such realistic games might be enough to push an already troubled kid over the edge.
For a very minuscule percentage of the population, I would say that point may be valid. However, I don't think you can govern an entire civilization based upon a minority interest.
The military has used some of these same animated games for training.
Don't call them first-person shooters. Call them murder simulators.
Former Army Colonel David Grossman, who has trained police and soldiers how to shoot, said video simulation, whether animated or with actors, is great at helping overcome the natural resistance people have to killing.
We are extraordinarily susceptible to programming. That's why we spend billions of dollars a year on these simulators.
But military instructors constantly stop the action to analyze judgment and purpose.
Explain to me real quick what you did there.
None of which happens when kids shoot for hours alone.
Although age is still a factor in determining punishment, it isn't the factor it once was. And that's because a 16-year-old today is not what a 16-year-old was 20 years ago. The experience base of youngsters is different, as well as their maturity. Kids have become more sophisticated, and so if a kid does something very evil, people want him or her judged for the act, not the kid's age. Thus, when a violent crime is committed involving elements of premeditation or malice, the community won't let a 16-year-old be tried as a juvenile. Increasingly, courts will treat him as an adult. Trying to assess why or how a youngster can commit acts of violence inevitably brings parents or guardians into the equation. The notion of imposing criminal responsibility on parents for the acts of their kids has been debated in this country for decades, but politically it remains unacceptable. This is a nation of individuality and leaving parenting to parents. It would be a far different landscape if we could get parents to be more accountable than they are, but we're not yet ready to criminalize them and to put them behind bars for their children's acts.
I'm Jay Shadler. Thanks for being with us. And join us again as we look behind the headlines at crime, punishment, and the law on the next edition of Justice Files.